Do you have a hotel recommendation there?
There's a hotel I like that you could stay at. Try the Nomad, see if you can get a good deal on it.
Oh,
It's
okay.
really great.
Yeah.
It's in
All
Covent Garden. It's nice. I like it.
I don't like Covent Garden.
It's got a nice library. Where do you want to go? What
I
neighborhood?
don't know. I don't know where I need to be. Welcome to People vs. Algorithms, a show about detecting patterns in media, technology, and culture. I am Brian Marcy, and each week I am joined by Troy Young and Alex Schleifer. This week, we have to focus on the election. I'm sorry, we do. The return of Donald Trump to the presidency is a remarkable comeback that also marks a return to the disruptive years of his first term. And for the already hard-hit news business, Trump is the ultimate complexifier, to use Jeff Bezos' great term. And his return comes at a time when the overall publishing business is really in the midst of a structural change that's put unprecedented pressure on its business models. This is something we talk about regularly on the show. And it got us thinking about the winners and losers from this election. So I wanted to run through a few of my own. One is the creator economy is clearly a winner, without a doubt. I don't know what else to call this. I've been trying to call it the Indieverse. I mean, how surreal was it to have, during Trump's victory speech, Dana White get the microphone and then he's shouting out the Nelk Boys, Theo Vaughn, and Joe Rogan. I mean, just rewind, say like even just 5 years and think about that as a possibility. It's really strange. And this was truly a podcast election. And it proved to me that the era of mainstream media is giving way to something far more decentralized. And this is just a capstone of this. And that's why I think that the mainstream media overall is a loser. I know this might be piling on, but you got to face reality. Many of the themes that were pushed out by mainstream news organizations, whether it was that comedian at Madison Square Garden or other issues, were just simply roundly rejected in the marketplace, which is the electorate. I mean, and the old saying is elections have consequences. And this is yet another wake-up call that this trust deficit for the packaged news media is wide and it's growing to the point where it's not clear if it can be narrowed over time. As it was put to me the other day by someone very plugged in Washington, Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan are more powerful than most news organizations. That's a difficult pill to swallow, but I think it's actually fairly accurate, particularly over the next 4 years. One of the other winners to me was Polymarket. It had a lot riding on this election. It is basically it's a betting site. I mean, they call these things prediction markets, but they're just betting. And a lot of times its odds were doubted. It was showing Trump winning for a long time. And there was a lot of reasons that were put forward again by the mainstream media. And they derided, these odds as being easily manipulated. And in the end, Polymarket kind of got proved right. And that's why I've long thought that Polymarket has the makings of a really intriguing media company. Because after all, I often say that, media will be the front end to a lot of different business models that are not the typical media business models. And I think Polymarket is a great example of these kind of quasi-media entities that we're going to see that fill the void in the information space. Some more losers, pollsters. Polling has gotten more inaccurate during the Trump years. Nate Silver ran apparently 60,000 simulations to conclude that the race was a toss-up. And then hours later, it became very clear that this was not the nail-biter that he and every other pollster said. Now, they will hide behind the idea that these are just odds and all that. And it seems like, heads, they win, tails, they still don't lose. The reality is they have a credibility problem, on par with when the Weather Channel went through that period of time when it kept hyping up massive storms that never arrived. But these days, that's a safe bet. Massive storms do arrive. And I think another winner as a whole is the information space. Notably, Elon Musk's bet on X is looking very different right now. I mean, I think it's hard to doubt that X is a very consequential media entity, particularly after the rightward shift of the electorate. Elon Musk might not be able to sell many ads there. I still do not believe this will be a thriving ad business. But the goal of billionaires dabbling in media is not great returns. I mean, I can think of few worse areas to make money these days than media. But it's to accrue power. And in that sense, mission accomplished. And finally, another losers are the billionaires as media saviors. At least this is an idea. I mean, Jeff Bezos made a sensible business decision right before the election. And this also proves that, to me, my theory that the billionaires have way better data than the rest of us when it comes to polling in these elections, in not risking lucrative government contracts for, what was really a pointless endorsement of Harris. And I know I've talked with lots of people who say, well, it's not about the endorsement. It's about the bending the knee and all of this. And like, yeah, I get that. But here's the thing. The entire idea of benevolent billionaire is an oxymoron. You do not become a billionaire through benevolence. It's just not in the DNA. Now, Patrick Soon-Shiong at the LA Times has proven this. Mark Benioff is throwing in the towel on time. This is the latest in a long parade of billionaires that have come into media, have gotten punched to the nose, and have quickly retreated. This is not a business for the faint of heart. It looks much easier on the outside than it is on the inside. We discuss all this on the show today, and then Alex spends a lot of it wondering whether any of it matters because the news media is in terminal decline. At least that's his point of view. Hope you enjoy the conversation. And if you do, please leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen to this. And send me some feedback, bmarcy@therebooting.com. We had a guest on last week, Moksha Fitzgibbons. We're hoping to have more guests. I want to see if that's what people are interested in. I think it's good to mix in both formats. Hope you enjoy the show. I think it's best to look at this a little bit clinically. I look at it as just trying to dissect it through the lens of all the stuff we talk about on this podcast. So maybe we probably will not get to the mystery of Latino voters, et cetera. That's probably for the best. But I want to get into what this means for the media industry going forward, because I think this is the first information space election, and it gave some verdicts, that's for sure. First, what about your experience watching it? Troy, you were traveling, right? So you didn't tune in to CNN or
I was
MSNBC?
For the beginning of it, I was sitting in an airport lounge. And so I was listening and watching on my phone. I was very curious about how Brian Williams and his production group would spin up a new kind of show. And that was the Amazon Prime show. And I watched that and would flip back and forth to, CNN. The interesting thing about the Prime special was kind of awkward. They didn't really have, the kind of run a show down. And he kept getting interrupted by these announcements. And they were sitting in this MGM projection facility that's like a mini version of the Sphere. So they had these crazy, you saw it, right, Brian?
Yeah.
They had those crazy backgrounds. What I liked best about it were the guests. So they had Peter Hamby and Scott Galloway, and I thought it was funny that they brought Dan Harris on to give people breathing exercises. They had like TikTok influences.
Did they have a Calm integration?
No.
They should have.
So it was a little hodgepodge, but it was kind of fun. And I thought that the talent that they brought in was refreshing, not like classic cable television talking heads. So there was a really nice kind of amateur thing about it. And it was almost like the internet came to the broadcast studio.
Yeah.
So a lot of people from the kind of emergent world of podcasting, next generation media, the sort of columnistization of the world, those people are perfect for people like Peter Hamby, who's great. Those people were great additions to the coverage. And it felt more both informative, I suppose, and, kind of interesting, and it touched my world more than the CNN approach.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it was amateurish at times, but I kind of like that. And I think that's like overall what we're seeing in the media world is all the high production values are declining in many ways in giving you sort of any advantage in the marketplace. And I thought it was interesting. It wasn't the same old thing, but it wasn't totally different. And so good. And I think we're going to have more of that going forward, because I think a big takeaway from this, I want to get into the winners and losers, but I don't know if you can come to any other conclusion, but this is like sort of the end of the mass media era in some ways, because this election was not really close. And I think a lot of us expected it to go this way, But, this is coming on the heels of basically since Donald Trump rode down that escalator, institutions have failed to respond in any kind of way to the challenges that he has presented. And to think that a decade on, they've been thoroughly repudiated, and the media doesn't come out of this looking good yet again. And when you look at all of the challenges that we talk about every week on this podcast,
can you be more specific? It doesn't look good. Why? Because it got it so wrong?
Yeah. I mean, at the core of the trust issue, right, is that I believe that a large group of this population does not believe that the media focuses on real issues. The guy telling jokes at Madison Square Garden, well, that clearly wasn't the big issue that the media was making out to be. Nate Silver, who is a great example of the expert class, ran 80,000 simulations to find that it was a dead heat. Guess what? It wasn't a dead heat at all. Overall, the entire polling industry needs to be immolated. It needs to be rebuilt. It's clear that whatever they're doing, from Ann Seltzer to all of the data jockeys, is not working at all. And then you look at the issues that, the mainstream media, the packaged media has been pushing, the narratives of, Donald Trump as an existential threat to democracy. Guess what? People voted. And they said the top issue was, protecting democracy, and they voted for Trump. That's just L's across the board. I don't think there's any other way to spin it. Am I wrong here?
No, I think you're right.
Okay, so that's a big loser.
Yeah. Well, what else did you look at? Let's keep going on this. I'd be curious what Alex is doing, other than when he went to his bomb shelter. But I think one of the better predictors for me is I was actually trading a bit of Bitcoin at the same time.
So you were you?
I was, honestly, yeah. And I was on Coinbase a lot because I thought that the price of Bitcoin was a good predictor of where it was going.
One of the things that I would say is I watched the beginning of this, like I was getting dinner in Miami, and nobody was watching the TV. Nobody, like zero people. More people were vaping than watching the TV.
Well, the Times did a good job again. No, I'm not talking about the content or the coverage. I'm talking about the interface was great.
Well, they got the needle back. That was good. I mean, the tech union.
They had the needle in every state. It's just the way they presented information was cool.
Alex, what was the scene on Threads?
Oh, I turned everything off, and I just checked this morning. I don't know. I didn't sleep. I was trying to listen to a movie podcast and fall asleep, but I couldn't fall asleep. And then this morning I just checked, and that was that. I don't understand why people would commit themselves to so much suffering of looking kind of numbers go up or down for hours. I wasn't into that. I think it was too consequential for me for it to become sport. Yeah. So I don't, my wife and I both turned things off and I played video games and then went to bed. That was it. People started texting me screenshots and shit, and I was like, I just turned the whole thing off.
Alex, when you woke up, where did you go?
I use this thing called Brick for my phone, which basically it's like a little puck I put on my fridge, and I tap my phone against it and it turns off all the apps. So the only thing I had available was like, first I checked our threads, our little message group. There was nothing useful there. And then I went to CNN and BBC and Google News. And then I went to Threads, and, Threads is like just on fire right now because, I mean, obviously people were in a bubble in there. People are in a different bubble on Twitter. But, the griftosphere has won out. I think the next 4 years are going to be insufferable.
Okay, well, let's get into the winners. I don't
know how like my Elon derangement syndrome is gonna age. I stand by it.
Well, he's going to stay.
Right.
He's going to stay in the United States now. He's not going to The Hague. So We'll get rockets and the rest of it. We might get some other stuff. But let's talk about the winners. You mentioned the grifter sphere. I mean, I would maybe explain what you mean by the grifter sphere.
It's the Joe Rogan extended universe, cinematic universe, right? It's like that whole podcasting, mostly podcasting, YouTube, manosphere, supplement selling, centrist posing, platforming whoever wants to talk to you for 3 hours, vaccine denying kind of environment that's won over. I think people
So
underestimated
you're
how
a fan.
much. Oh, I'm a huge fan. Yeah. I love this stuff. I think it makes us safer and smarter. When the guy that used to make people eat like elephant balls on TV and cockroaches now, helps our presidential candidate win. That's great. It's great
Yeah,
news
it is
for
noteworthy
democracy.
that Dana White took the microphone at the Trump celebration and called out the Nelk boys and Joe Rogan above all else. The All In guys didn't seem like they got any shout outs, which is a shame. But I think it's pretty clear.
I think the All In guys fit in a different category, which is all the billionaires and masters of industry that were seeing the tide turn and decided to suck up to the new king before he was new king, knowing that if by chance Harris would win, she wouldn't be as retaliatory as Trump would be. So everybody shows up great.
Man, I'm
Courage.
the cynical one. My God.
I don't know. Maybe it's because European education teaches you a lot about the dangers of fascism.
But that was rejected by voters.
Yeah, no, sure.
We can't sort of get around that.
And to be fair, the election went relatively smoothly, if you want an upside,
Yeah. But it's very clear that the podcasters did come out as a winner in this. And I think broadly speaking, if you talk about the decline, we've talked about it a lot, of mass media, a lot of this influence is leaking out to places like podcasting and what I call the indieverse. And that has emerged as, to me, a clear winner. Troy, what do you think?
I think that's true. I think that the Rogan thing that Trump did in particular went a long way to sort of humanize him. And I think this style of conversational media was really important in the election. I don't think its influence was overemphasized or overestimated. In terms of the winners, I think Alex is right. The bros won, Elon won. Seemingly corporate America will benefit. I think that type of sort of center-right partisan media did great. I think, in the end, everybody hated on J.D. Vance, and he turned out to be the sort of president of the Yale Debating Club. And I think showed up as a competent sort of partner to fight Trump's battles and never back down from them. I think this will position him incredibly well. If you're in fossil fuels, you're probably a winner.
Let's stick to media.
Yeah.
Well,
that French guy.
Yeah, it's true. If you're the planet or women, you kind of,
the losers were clearly women, DEI, probably broadcasting.
But I mean, even if you look at the media landscape, that the griftosphere, as we call it, it's mostly male. It's so broy. It's incredible, and the voting patterns lined up.
But this is like Trump won everything. He didn't. It's not a male thing. If you look at it, it's like he won 10 points more in Manhattan. This is an utter repudiation. I'll give people a few days to sort of get over their hurt feelings and stuff, but it's time to look inward. This isn't a messaging problem. It's a product problem, right?
The coalition is broken. There's a big problem. I don't know how if you're the Democrats, you have to do a huge amount of soul searching about what is fundamentally bringing a group of people together.
But I want to talk about the media's role in this, right? Because after 2016, we were told it was Russia. We were told it was Cambridge Analytica, it was Facebook, all these different things that were trying to explain a phenomenon that people didn't like, right? And there wasn't like a reality. People got J.D. Vance's book to try to understand it for a little bit, but there wasn't really an acceptance of reality that this very unusual character had tapped into something that is broad within the American electorate and just the American people. And at first it was, and it's still, you hear, oh, it's just, racist and all of this. And that just makes it even worse. And then all of a sudden he's broadening a coalition to include Latinos. And Trump didn't do terrible really with women overall. And so it's hard to really, I don't see how you come out of this without thinking a lot about how the mass media in general has just not figured this out. And I don't know if it can at this point. And I don't know where it goes from here. Is it like 2017 where it goes back into the leaders of the resistance, right? Does it make an accommodation like the billionaires? I don't know. What do you think is the path that will be taken? People are going to have to figure out a path. And I think what Bezos saw was he saw the numbers. There's another thing. I think clearly there's a lot of people who had way better numbers than the ones that we were fed.
Clearly.
Through the media.
There was a memo went around to the billionaires.
Yeah. I don't know what their pollsters are like, but they're clearly better. They're running better simulations than Nate Silver's, because that was a clear choice. And I think Jeff Bezos comes out of this actually in a weird way. People won't like to hear this, but as a winner. He hedged the bet when it was a good idea. For who, for what? Like, he's not going down with, consternation in the Washington Post newsroom. He's not going to do that.
Yeah, Brian, you make the things you just said resonate so much with me. And I think that it will come, I called it, you need a new coalition, which is a set of ideas that brings, people together and gives you something that collectively can represent the energy of a country. Because what has the, GOP done? There's been a complete realignment of the working class to the GOP, right? And they've completely taken sort of non-college educated Americans from the Democrats. In this election, major unions declined to support the Democratic Party, which is a break with history. They lost Latinos. They lost Black men.
Not really.
No, but I mean, in terms of percentages relative to the last, eroded, right?
Sure.
And white suburbanites shifted even more strongly to Republicans. When I step back, I don't know, in addition to needing this kind of like new ideas that can align a group of people that are just not the sort of talking points that seemingly came out of the media that didn't resonate at all. And I'm saddened by what I think was in America's just kind of basic sexism from actually both men and women, that it's really hard to get a female elected president in this country. I think that there is, broadly speaking, and I don't know the best way to frame this, but I think it's just a woke backlash where what people don't want this kind of what is understood broadly to be this kind of sensitive, liberal, woke mindset to be the defining characteristic of this, time. And voting for Trump is a complete rejection of that. You can't talk about this without, I think we'll look back and say, well, we had a really weak candidate. I like Kamala, and I think I just find her likable as a person, but I think as a leader and as a presidential candidate, she was unable to separate from the Biden legacy. She lost on Israel. She lost on immigration. She lost on inflation. She lost on like all the issues. And so all of these things together, and I think that, I don't know how, what kind of Trump savant-esque kind of understanding of his core constituency is like, he obviously has a very good sense of what people want. And I don't think it's coming from, a bunch of strategists. And that won. It just did. It won in a democratic system. And so the other side is like, you're right. Like, what was the media's role in this, and what does it mean to the DNC? And I think these are really complicated, questions that need to get resolved before another election.
Yeah, Kamala Harris also spent way more money on advertising. And I mean, Trump put a lot of money in advertising, but also that needs to be recalculated. In a world where mass media has clearly lost its central role in society, the political class, the political consultants love to pour money into advertising because they run the firms and they get rich off it. I mean, it's crazy. This makes ad tech look like, a charity business, but it didn't work. I think you spent $1 billion to do worse. You're literally starting off in this country. You've got Donald Trump up against you. You're starting off with 40+%. That's your basement. That's where, it is. And you're just building on top of that. And you spend $1 billion.
More than
Wow.
a billion. You know, the other strange thing is the normalization of chaos. Like our culture has become so accustomed to just chaos. And I
Okay.
think it's exhausting.
Well, I think that is interesting is when we talk about how, journalists cover the Trump return. It's going to be in 2017 to 2020, there was a lot of those, the Washington Post, I think, actually started. It was like, we talked to 43, unnamed officials. And then it was like, okay, somebody's fighting with somebody. Trump's raging. I mean, Maggie Haberman was like, it's like, oh no, Trump's raging. It's like, oh God. I mean, we clearly can't go back to that. And also, again, it's just wholesale rejected. I go back to nobody was looking at those at the TVs. I don't think Trump too, and I could be wrong. I don't think it's going to. I think covering it the way it was covered with who's up, who's down, makes no sense at all because of that exhaustion that's been set in. Now, people, this is the popular voice has been heard. So people want this guy in office, and they clearly agree more with his policies than Kamala Harris's. But how the media covers this, I think, has to change. And I don't know whether they fall in line. I don't think that's obviously.
Well, people don't. I mean, just stating the obvious, people don't trust and they don't care. The media didn't change people's point of view.
But I guess the question ends up being, is that the job of these news organizations, right? Is it the job?
Well, sure, of course it is.
It's to change people's points of view?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that in a partisan way. I'm saying by informing people, yes.
I think they're different things.
You don't think people were informed and that's why they voted a certain way? I mean, that's hard to tell.
Well,
right?
Okay, so what does it take to persuade someone, Alex? Like, if I'm presenting things like, if I call you a fascist or a despot, or I align all the people that were close to you, generals, etc., and say you're not to be trusted, or I say that your policies around deportation are insane and impractical, or I say that your tariff policies are going to create inflation. Now, all of those things would either lead you to believe that there's a better alternative because you believe them and you trust what someone's saying to you and it persuades you, or you believe, you just think they're bullshit and you're going to go with this, carnival barker. Like, if you don't trust the things that people in, institutionalized media are saying to you, that they're both the right things and they're believable and they matter, then what's the purpose of the media? Like what replaces it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's grim. I mean, if only just the tariffs, right? Like seeing the level of education around the proposed tariffs. My complaint about the media was that it was trying this weird kind of centrist, both sides, let's cover both sides with the same amount of fervor. And I don't think that resonated with anyone. I think the stuff that resonated was the stuff that was already talking people into the things that they were feeling. I think this was a very vibes election. I don't think people voted on, I don't know, they probably, the gas is more expensive and they're worried about foreigners coming into the country. That's as simple
the problem
as
is gas isn't more expensive.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, I know. Like it doesn't even matter. It's just like vibes, right? People feel like the life has become more expensive.
Oh, I think there's been inflation. I'm just saying gas hasn't been.
Yeah.
I mean, the economy is doing great, compared to anywhere else in the world. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what the media could have done. It just definitely shows that they don't have much power left, right? And I don't even know how much Rogan and stuff like that influenced this other stuff.
But that's the weird part,
I think it was
right?
there's so much noise in that data. Like, he was also going up against a woman of color. Like, God knows how people voted around that, right? Like, it's hard to tell.
But it was also a person that just got dropped into the race without people voting for. Like, you can't untangle all of these things.
Oh, I mean, they definitely fucked
years
that up, right?
of saying Biden's sharp as a tack, and the media did launder that nobody's business. People are not dumb.
all
They're
people
not
clinging
dumb.
onto power and trying to remain relevant is like, maybe that's a good analogy for media. It's like Biden not wanting to
That's
get
true.
away, just
I mean,
leave it.
What do you make of, on one hand, sort of, I would say, distrust of institutions or experts, right? Whether that's an economist or, a doctor, but the kind of wild embrace of someone like Elon as an innovator.
what do you mean? Like, I mean, I think, Elon is
Well,
like a remarkable, historical figure.
We trust Joe Rogan more than we trust like real professionals, like doctors.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of it. Like, we talk about it all the time. Like, right now, I always thought that the perceived authenticity and being your real self, I mean, because nobody really thinks that Trump is someone totally different behind closed doors. Like, I don't think anyone thinks, like, I mean, what could it be? If anything, he's more normal, like behind closed doors. But like, nobody really believes that. And I think with Joe Rogan, it's like similar where, we've seen this decline, or we've seen, like, I think it's been mispriced. Authenticity has been mispriced in the marketplace, but that is not going to end. That this is going to be, I think, how the next sort of phase of media goes. It is going to be moving more in this direction than Joe Rogan becoming more like, I don't know, Peter Jennings or something, or Jay Leno. Like, that's just not happening. And I think that every single trend right now is going against a lot of the mass media conventions. And it's a hard transition to make. That's why I think that every single media entity is going to need to come to terms with how they respond to this in the marketplace, right? And you look at, we talk about the puck model a lot. It's not perfect, but like, they've put personalities front and center, and I think that's going to be a continued path that will be taken. Because again, look at the market. Like, if the market rejects what you have, like, you have to adapt. You can't just blame the customer. Like, that's crazy. And just to go back to politics, I think the Democratic Party had a product that was being broadly rejected and kept blaming the customers, and it didn't work out.
I wonder if the left will start embracing their kind of, like, I don't know, what do you call them, firebrand YouTubers? Because there are people like Destiny and stuff like that on YouTube that are just like, militant left, just aggressive, podcaster. It's kind of the left-wing version of that same sphere, right? It exists. It's just like the establishment, the coalition doesn't embrace them like the right embraced like Rogan and Shapiro and all these guys. Like, there's like, everybody's coordinated, right? The left isn't coordinated. Instead, it's trying to be centrist. And
the problem I have with that is that America's not a country that embraces strident leftists ever.
Yeah, it's a center-right country.
Yeah.
Is it center-right? Doesn't seem to
compared to Europe, yes.
It's
outside of like Serbia and Russia and a few other places, like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm saying right now it's more right than center-right, but yeah.
Well, if you look at that is the story, at least initially coming out of this election, this is a moment of a sharp turn to the right in this country. I mean, it goes back and forth, but it is pretty much never been truly liberal in the American sense of liberal. It's just for historical reasons and lots of other reasons. I mean, it's embedded in like, self-reliance and all that stuff that's embedded in the American psyche. So I think that it's always going to be right of center, and how the Democratic Party responds is going to be interesting. And when you talk about the media, I don't know, like, to me, the market always, tells you again, like, it doesn't seem like the very hard left militant podcasters, grifters or whatever have nearly the cut through that their counterparts do. Now, maybe that was just because it's easy to be a rebel when, Biden is president, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some basic lessons here that we could articulate. And it's like, this is age old, but you need your base. That this shift, let's call it to, it's like I don't know if it's the conversational movement in media driven by podcasts brings out, I think it advantages certain types of politicians. I think that's going to be far more of our media spectrum that the world becomes. I think that kind of audio as an extension of all media is going to be way more important. And I think that people, to your point about authenticity, are going to look for that same authenticity in their politicians, whether it's, savory or not.
Yeah. I think like just by going on Rogan, it doesn't even matter if people were not the 42 million who actually, watched it on YouTube and so many more like on Spotify and Apple. I think it just proves that like you can get a measure of the person and that they can like hold their own. And I think that is going to become a core feature that you need in running for this position.
That's what
it
I'm
used to be
saying.
you had to
Yes, I
give like a
agree.
great speech, right? But like when you listen now, and I say this to someone like you listen to Obama talk, it seems like from a different era, to be honest with you. Like I know everyone like fell off their like chair about the Michelle Obama thing. Again, it seemed like so retro. And part of that is how Trump has completely shifted the norms for that kind of speechifying. I'm very thankful personally. Anytime I give a solo presentation now, the bar is set to where, you can wander off in all kinds of different directions.
To get practical about it, you think about, instances like what would you do if you were now the programming head at CNN? How would you change the formats? If you, in light of the election, would you have changed what, Jeff Bezos did at the Washington Post? Would you have done anything differently? How would you organize a newsroom differently in this kind of more conversational environment? Do you like the idea, like the semaphore idea, where we start to physically kind of break facts and opinion in every article, whether they call it the semaphore or whatever? What do you think are some of the things that you would do if you owned, legacy media to prepare for this new world?
I would start by reverse engineering what's working, right? Like I think we started this with like Joe Rogan. Why does that work? Why does this guy from Fear Factor? Why is he like so influential? Seemingly, let's just assume that he's very influential. Well, then why is that?
I can't help you there. I think there was a format that he managed to help kind of. Mark Maron was, when I started listening to podcasts, Mark Maron was one of the first with these long form.
He was the original Rogan. He was the liberal Rogan.
Yeah, he wasn't. Liberal, like pretty centrist in some ways. But I started listening to him like episode 4. When he had like a handful of listeners, and the format immediately appealed to me because the conversations could go on for a while. You could keep it on in the background, and you could get to know people, and it was just interesting. And I think so Rogan kind of won that format, and so he's got just a lot of energy behind him, and I think that's part of it. Like people just like listening to podcasts, men specifically, right? This is a very male-driven election. Even though women's rights were on the ballot box, a lot of like male media kind of drove this. And this kind of like concept of listening to hour-long meandering, philosophizing is very male dominant. You can probably figure out the gender distribution of the All In podcast. I haven't been to their event, but I'm pretty sure the audience there is going to be skewing a certain way. Or Lex Friedman. Like, how many women listeners do you think Lex Friedman has? He doesn't even
7.
How many women guests do these guys get on?
That's true.
Is there? So I like this.
I
like this idea of reverse engineering the product. But Brian, what does that mean? Like, is there a problem in newsrooms? Is there a fundamental cultural problem in newsrooms?
Oh, probably, right? There's an unreality, right? And there's also like, it's like nobody is safe, right? I got this person, like I just wrote a very like annoyingly middle of the road thing like last week about the Post, right? And I got like, it's like, I'm done, I'm out, you are supporting a fascist. I'm like, what are you talking about? I actually wrote back this person, and it was very clear this person's an editor, right? And there is an activist strain that's clear within journalism that has always been present. I think it can be good, because they have like a mission driven, and this is after Watergate. I think it really sprung up. But I think in many ways it goes into directions that aren't helpful with building that connection with an audience. It's very clear that a large group of people in this country do not trust journalists. And it is easy to blame other people for that. And some of that blame is completely correct. However, they're tapping into an underlying feeling, and all the data supports that news is not on the up and up when it comes to separating people's personal opinions from their work. I mean, the reality is most newsrooms are filled with people who voted for Kamala Harris. That is not I'm not going into some conspiracy there. Like, that's obvious.
But to me, doesn't this just show, like, I don't know how much doesn't this just show that the media, just the relevancy is dying out, which is why in our text message, I'm pushing for us, like, to stop covering the dying brands of the media, and rather look forward at the new things that are coming. I don't think it's entirely the right call to just look at what Rogan's achieved and see like what others can learn from that. Because remember, half the population, or around half the population, didn't vote for Trump, probably feels very differently. The vast majority of podcast consumers and kind of, that sphere around YouTube, vast majority are men. So the question should be more, there's this whole other side of the consumer, women, young people, that make up a large proportion of the audience, which I think aren't served. I think the dudes that listen to Rogan are very well served. They can be mediated all day long with free media that like tickles, like, whatever, nerve they need tickled. And then, I can tell you like, where else do you go for that sort of catharsis if you're a woman or somebody who leans in the other direction? That's less evident. So I think maybe I feel that if media just starts saying, well, we need to become Rogan, that's going to be a fool's errand.
No, I don't mean philosophically. I mean, when I say reverse engineering,
but even the format, how many women in your life do you know consume podcasts at the rate that men consume? Why is that? Like, that's the more interesting question for me. Like, women do not consume podcasts at the same rate as men.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that true? How do we know that?
Every piece of like the popular podcast, every piece of like gender distribution I've seen like skews heavily male, especially when you're looking at the Friedmans and the stuff like that. I mean, these are technology podcasts, but even, MKBHD and all these types of things, like these kind of YouTube shows that are around tech and politics and these types of news, it's like 7% women.
Sirius claims that it's almost split. It's 53% male, but they have an interest in that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's something interesting to look at. Like, there's definitely like a split, like a gender split happening, as well as an ideological one as to how, like, the formats that people consume. And I know that there's probably lots of podcasts that that are majority women, but I don't think the numbers line up with a Rogan. There's nothing.
Well,
like
I think I would just be careful. I think we probably need to validate it. I think that a lot of the big podcasts are male driven, but I think that you'd probably find, other types of consumption. Maybe it's more fragmented. Maybe it's more short form stuff on Instagram and TikTok rather than, YouTube and podcasts. But I think the phenomenon of, people channeling their point of view and, these kind of folk media people is probably universal.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that people want to know, like, what the person who's creating the media, like, where they're coming from, right? And to me, that is a big takeaway. Like, hiding behind the institutional brand is not going to cut it anymore. That was my big problem with the editorial board endorsement at the Washington Post. Like, who? You just got hired. Like, what makes your point of view like more valid than anyone else? I don't even know your name. Like, why are you christened? Because you got through the HR department?
I mean, at the end of the day, it
job?
doesn't even matter, right?
Well, yeah, it doesn't
even
matter either, but I think it speaks to an underlying arrogance that's embedded in the capital J journalism like world. Like there is. Like, why does it?
But are we trying to fix something that will never be fixed?
Yes.
Like, it's like,
Yeah,
it's like,
All right, so let's move on.
I think we should.
Just hold on. Like,
I think we should. It's all.
If, liberal newsrooms are serving liberal audiences, New York Times is doing quite well. There's half the country, appreciates the news output of a lot of these left-leaning institutions. The problem is that liberal media it's almost impossible to come to terms with what we've had to kind of navigate with Trump. It's just like, if the whole premise is, facts and experts and, hard reporting and the search for some type of objective truth, the Trump thing just completely turns it on its head. Like, how do you navigate that? How do you ever navigate that? And maybe the answer is you don't. Maybe you just serve your audience. Maybe Bezos shouldn't have worried about endorsements and just say, the Washington Post is a liberal paper. We don't need an endorsement to know that the newsroom.
But the reason he didn't endorse was not the reasons Brian thinks there shouldn't be endorsement. The reason he didn't endorse is because there's like a vengeful guy in power and he wants to put rockets into space. Like, so much of this election has been transactional, right? Like, so that's why it's kind of hard to even. And the ownership structures of these media companies make it hard to understand why they make decisions. Like the Bezos one is one that's like that. But you're right. I mean, I think they're going to keep serving their audience and people are perfectly happy with it. I do feel that, and specifically in that there's a new type of news commentary media mixed with entertainment, mixed with interviewing that's become hugely influential. It seems to serve men in majority. I'm not saying women don't listen to podcasts. That's been a big shift. That's been a big evolution. I don't know what new media companies come out of that. I think AI is going to play a role. I think that's what we should cover, like the new stuff that's going to come out. The old stuff is either going to survive and not change or disappear, right? I mean, I don't think there's much to do with it.
I found it very interesting. I think one of the winners out of this, speaking to like what comes next, is Polymarket, right? I mean, like Polymarket got there first. While Nate Silver was running his 80,000 simulations, they were saying, this is Trump. And I think it'll be very interesting to see, I don't know if I was following them on Twitter, X, whatever. And they were like, we're the new news, like they were like emerging as, and I think it'll be interesting to see what kinds of news sources emerge. There's a clear lane that like the free press took, with having, they have a point of view and they're going to be writing to that point of view. And it's just slightly off because it's center right. I saw someone, Bubba Atkinson described it. He's a really funny guy. He described it as one of the concierge services. So like the free press is a concierge service for Democrats to become Republicans. And then I think the bulwark is the concierge service for Republicans to become Democrats. But most of the lanes, I think we're going back to pre-mass media where all the business interests are to align explicitly with an ideological point of view, if not a specific political party. Newspapers always did this before.
Well, maybe we're over sort of correcting or emphasizing the role of media in this when we have a problem with ideas that are clearly not resonating, when we have a problem with the organization of a group of people around ideas. And so it's not just a media problem. It's a political problem.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's not to mention, other, challenge threat facing media, which you talk about, Brian, as being, news as a feature, as opposed to the product and the feature of, just something that's kind of tacked on to a chat service. What I would just kind of make a point around rather than good product is this. I had a moment this week using ChatGPT, as some of the listeners will know, or you guys know, that they sort of are steadily closing the last mile. And what that means is, in addition to bringing on core LLM developers, bringing on news suppliers or content suppliers, they're connecting the LLM to the web index, right? So that all of your queries go out and they don't just process. It's not like just like, oh, there's a search engine on Wikipedia. They're processing, real-time information off the web. And it was just like a moment I texted Alex or I texted you guys where I had been querying. It was a product query around speakers as like audio speakers. Mm-hmm. And basically in my mind, it had completely ripped the interface layer off the internet, where it just brought back what I wanted. It delivered like, here's the speakers, here's the features and benefits, here's the auction price, here's the date listed, here's how they compare. Like I put it all in tables. Here's how they compare to other products in the category. And it was virtually instantaneous, and it was real-time data, and it was put into an interface that was just so efficient for me. And I did the same thing with a flight query, looking for flights, where it just grabbed all the information, put it in a table for me. And I could look at it any way I wanted. And I just thought, oh my God, everything I've thought about for the years and years and years, which is sort of a page level construct as access point to information, web design as boxes on pages, is over now. It's like we have to think massively, we have to think differently about what our role is as someone who supplies information to a surface area, because that information is being absorbed into something where it's a query and it's formatted however you want it, and it's not an organized interface. So to me, and then Alex said something great, which is sort of like, it's going to make the web better or it dies. Like it just has, like the page has to be useful or interesting or interactive or something, or there's no reason for it to exist. And I think that's something that's been bugging you, Alex. And it's a really interesting time to think about what is the role of a company providing digital information and how do you monetize it? And to me, I was just sort of thinking about the dimensions, like the rallying cry, inside a media organization, inside of this platform shift to reality. And I was like, okay, well, we have to have direct connections to people, whether we have the gravity to have an app, or we can do text notifications or email, or someone is using an interface that we create such that it's better than the alternative. So direct, obviously that implies an editorial or a content strategy that in the face of what is inevitably the commoditization of a lot of information, you have to have a talent strategy, right? Like this, where the creator world meets the AI world. Mm-hmm. You have to be more human. I don't think that, that we think enough about what is unique about our data set, about what it is, if it's information, what it is that we are gathering, processing, organizing, curating, that we are introducing into the world. What we used to do is we would scramble to write evergreen content that 5 other companies already wrote, and we would just try to do it better so we could spoof the search engine, we could win that game. And then you think, well, multimedia, at least today, chat doesn't do multimedia, right? Whether that's audio or video or a combination of, or interactivity, like that's going to be much more important inside of your media organization. And the last one I would say is this is going to force at least some companies to figure out how, this is actually going to push you to be transactional, whether that means selling a product or taking first party data or facilitating, the purchase of a service or, a product, because the AI can't break that.
I think that's true. I think everybody should basically consider themselves like the Yellow Pages in 1999. Like I think that there's going to be.
It was still a big business in 1999.
Exactly. And some of these, when I complain about this stuff, I hear it's still a big business, but look, they had a record year and Taboola is still doing great. I feel like we've spent a lot of time turning pages so that they would be machine readable with SEO, so that, they would be kind of absorbed. And yeah, there's a potential where, as the information layer is completely absorbed by the LLMs and AI, and AI kind of gives you information much better. Your daily news update, a little in whichever format you want, that's all going to happen. We have an opportunity to create value. There's going to be a bunch of value destruction, but there's like new value that can be created. And I hope it's an opportunity to save the web, because the web is the last place that you will fully own and control. So I think Troy is right. I mean, there's an opportunity there.
Having like undifferentiated information is a road to nowhere. If everyone else has the information and you got it like quote unquote first, it doesn't do a ton for you. And I think that's going to take a rethinking, because I always remember like in newsrooms, it was like your competitor gets a story and it's like, we have to match it. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, unless they're inaccurate, what are we providing? And some of it was just like, well, we have to we don't want to train people to go to Ad Age instead of Adweek. I'm like, they go to both. What are you kidding? Like, what's the matter? Like, sometimes you win. Sometimes you get the 3 finalists for the Pennzoil review. Sometimes Ad Age does. I don't think people really care. But yeah, there's been too much of that. So I think you have to just like refactor the whole organizations and what you're after.
I do think that like my hope for the podcast is that we talk a little bit more about this new stuff, because I think there's a tendency for us to look at what do we do with all these old brands? And I don't think we can provide that much help with that. Like, I don't find these conversations that interesting either, but rather talk about the tools and the opportunities that are coming up. I don't know how brands are going to use them, but it's a little bit like, it could be a little bit like talking about MTV and saying, what MTV should do right now is move to reality TV, which was the right call. It gave them another 5 years, maybe 10. But the truth of the matter is there's like really interesting content creation technology, distribution technology, multiple ways to monetize it. People just need to find new places where value can exist and value can be created. That's what I hope. That's my optimistic message for the future.
All right.
It should be exciting.
What did you think about the election?
It was a fucking nightmare. I mean,
what would you do if you owned the Washington Post?
I don't know. I guess I didn't get the phone call that Bezos got. So I don't know. Didn't get the phone call that you better do something or your rockets stay grounded. I don't know what happened. I wouldn't be in that space at all. I think they're all regretting these purchases.
Well, I think those are all ending. I mean, Mark Benioff is apparently looking to unload time to Antenna, which was going to buy Vice, but then didn't. So I think it's the end of the billionaires. It turns out they don't have the journalism industry's best interests at their hearts. Go figure.
The crazy thing is I grew up watching Antenna and having them spend. Yeah. It's a big Greek media company. There's channels that we could get in Cyprus. Well, the thing that's going to be fun to watch is how they all turn on each other. That's going to be fun.
And that will be fun. That will be fun. Because that's coming.
There's
only one main character, and he has a deep tan.
Yes, exactly.
And what's going on with that? What's going on with the tan? If you go to the New York Times homepage right now, the center image, he's very kind of a brownish orange. Is that a kind of cosmetic product? What is that?
It's a spray tan, yeah.
Is it spray?
Yeah, for sure, because it doesn't go around his ears.
So the new president is a spray tanner?
You're noticing that now? Would that have changed your vote?
Thought it was
Troy,
natural.
would you have changed your vote if you knew that?
Why wasn't the media covering this?
I actually genuinely wonder. He seems to have less of the energy and the cogency. I wonder how active he's going to be, because he's got to be exhausted, like 78 years old.
I wouldn't want to do that at 78. I don't want but these people
he might not make it. I mean, this is like, it's
built different.
It takes a lot.
Brian, would you mind if I just have you wrap this up and just kind of based on how you started it?
How did I start it?
You started it by talking about the media's complicit, how they were sort of complicit in kind of where we are now.
I understand your point, Alex, that it does seem, it's like, wow, why are we talking about this? Because I do think it is kind of like the denouement of this story, right? We all know that mass media has been losing its relevancy and its power and its centrality. And this is just making it abundantly clear, like that this is not going to be, it's not coming back necessarily. I mean, I don't wish ill on any of these companies. I think they're needed, and I think that they're going to be forced to adapt, and they'll have different roles. But it's very clear that the roles that they played in the past are gone. They're not coming back. And so my hope is that new entrants do fill that, who aren't just from the grifter sphere, I believe you call it a grifter sphere, which is broad
and derogatory. I get it.
It is derogatory, but my hope is that like new, we do have new entrants who use a lot of the tools and the platforms that are taking place to have credible information that people can trust.
But your point was broader. Your point was that the media missed a kind of a sensibility, not even what am I saying? Like they missed the nation's sentiment, and they were no longer important, not just, in sort of sensing what's going on in the country, but influencing people.
Yeah. I mean, that's very obvious that, the influence that the mainstream media has over people is, maybe it was never as great as they pretended it to be, but it's clear from the advertising to the coverage, none of these issues that were pushed nonstop seemingly cut through. At least if you look at the data that came out so far, I mean, none of it did. None of it resonated. No, they made the choices to push these. Look, Trump talks all day long. You can choose what you're going to focus on. And it's always the hardest thing as a reporter. It's like, okay, what am I going to focus on? Like at 3 hours, he said this one thing, like as an aside off the teleprompter. He doesn't really even use the teleprompter. So I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to bring in a lot of B material because, he kind of called Kamala Harris like a bitch, but not really. And so I can get 700 words out of that. I just don't think that is not influencing people. People have seen through this, and we're seeing this throughout the media. Like all of these conventions are losing traction in the marketplace. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed with Semaphore that I think is kind of interesting, but I don't think it'll work, is they're publishing way more Q&As. Like they're actually showing the material, right? Like, because you make so many choices with stories. And I mean, first of all, storytelling as the heart of journalism needs to go away, because in most people's minds, storytelling means making stuff up, right? You tell stories and you make choices within telling those stories that sometimes like make a very complicated situation seem very cut and dry and simple. And I think anyone has been I thankfully nobody's ever written about me, but like, I'm sure the experience of having been written about, like you've experienced it, Troy, you're like, well,
I love it.
This is kind of based on a true story, but not quite the true story. And there's been a lack of humility about that, I feel like, throughout the profession, and there needs to be more of it. You could get away with that when there was fewer choices in the analog media industry, because there's just a power imbalance. That's why nobody picks a fight with someone who buys ink by the gallon or whatever. That's why that's over.
I also wonder, I mean, it's going to be interesting, but it's like how much analysis can be done about the media landscape, considering how unique a character Trump is. Like there was nobody, even though he was 77 or 78 when he came back, there was nobody to step up to him. Like he's just such a unique animal. And once he's gone, have they built an enduring playbook? That's what I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know.
And does that whole manosphere environment fade away the same way other fads kind of come and go,
Yeah. And I would add just one last thing to it, is that what you're saying, Brian, is the role of the filter and the interpreter and the curator that was defined, by the kind of journalistic conventions in the newsroom is changing. And, the all-in guys would say that it's been replaced by the commons and by, a kind of iterative process where we arrive at the truth through conversation and lots of actors and the algorithm. Elon would say it's publicly sourced and filtered by the algorithm, and the truth floats to the top. And in that world, we kind of, all of the, kind of journalistic conventions that we're accustomed to are challenged. That's what you're saying about the Q&A. It's sort of like, okay, roll back the filtering role, the storytelling role. Let's just present the conversation.
Right. But it's also like, I think the role moves from filtering to like connecting the dots, right? Like, and I think that to me, when you get at these podcasts, beyond the like oddities of them, like what they really get at is a conversation where people are connecting dots between different things. And I think that's what the power of them is. When you package up, when you present these like neat packages with it's all sanded down, and it comes across, particularly these days, as completely inauthentic. Mm-hmm. And I think that is part of it. So I think reinventing the packaging is critical. I just can't imagine that the 750 word inverted pyramid story is going to be the sort of atomic unit of journalism in 5 years. Doesn't seem likely.
There you go.
All right. So we'll focus on that going forward.
We should focus on that. Look ahead. I need stuff to distract me.
Well, soon we can talk about the midterms.
America is a fucking hardcore place to live. Got to be honest.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
This isn't Cyprus or Austria or any of those places.
It's just an interesting country. And I feel like seeing just even glimpses of the media onslaught yesterday, I'm like, my God, you got to be either masochist or just so hardened to just put yourself in front of that stuff, for hours and hours. And I was proud that I managed to stay off it. I think there was one of my better moments.
I just think America refuses to be a normal country, and it will always refuse to be a normal place. And in some ways, that's to be celebrated. I think always goes its own way. I mean, the good thing is,
it's like no other country. I think that the way the states are organized, and the whole political system, the way it's all held together is pretty special. So I want to celebrate that.
Yeah, couldn't pull it off if you were Belgium. Like 0% chance.
No, I mean, it's too small. As I tell, like, people in France don't worry about, political decisions that are made in Poland. 99.9% of the time, you don't wake up freaking out about what's happening in Poland. And that's the same thing as here, waking up in California and looking at how Florida has voted. Like, that rarely happens. Like, there's nothing like that in most countries in the world. And then other large countries like China, is just completely different. So it's a coalition in itself. And it feels that you're constantly always worried about what's happening everywhere, which is exhausting. And we're going to have a lot of adverts for, anxiety medication popping up everywhere.
I also, just a final thought on that is, I almost think like going forward over the next 4 years, I almost think like news is going to come with like a Surgeon General's warning, like about it being bad for your mental health. Like I don't think that, broadly speaking, the populace can return to 2017 through 2020.
Lost.
Like maybe it's just built up immunity, but I don't know if people can return to that. And so I think news avoidance is going to get worse too.
Yeah, fun time.
Sensible decision.
That's it for this episode of People versus Algorithms, where each week we uncover patterns shaping media, culture, and technology. Big thanks, as always, to our producer, Vanya Arsenov. She always makes us a little clearer and more understandable, and we appreciate her very, very much. If you're enjoying these conversations, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It helps us get the word out and keeps our community growing. Remember, you can find People vs. Algorithms on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and now on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
All right.
Enjoy London, Troy.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.